Today, I'm bringing you one of the most controversial videos that we have had on this channel, and it's going to be very hard to digest for many people, so stick with me. I've spent the last few months watching over 100 hours of neo-Nazi podcasts.
Es ist Zeit bereit! Wir müssen die Juden aufhalten! Es ist Zeit bereit!
Not because I agree with them, but because I was curious. What do these people actually believe? Why are they so angry? And why is this perspective spreading, even though it's highly banned from all mainstream media? This video is not a defense of their views, and it's not even an attack. This is just an exploration of what we call the social shadow. Now, I don't like being told what I'm allowed to hear. When society bans something, it usually means that there's something in it that we don't want to face. My role as a Jungian shadow coach is to look into areas that most people repress or deny. And if anything in modern society today is being repressed, it is white pride. We've been manufacturing a perfect environment of suppression and projection, much like we do with our own personal shadows in the unconscious. As you know, when you do this, you grow the shadow and you make it darker. Now, everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the greater it is in the collective unconscious. Now, that was a quote from Carl Jung for you. I would like to remind you that what happens when this occurs, the shadow unconsciously lashes out into the conscious. We saw this exact mechanism play out in New Zealand through Brenton Tarrant in 2019. He ended 51 lives in a single day. Now, people will reasonably point to him and say, as a man, look, do you see? These people are dangerous. We must attack them. We must suppress them. We must deny them and lock them all up. And this is where our conversation must become very sober. I'm going to ask you to tighten your boots laces for this one, because what I have to say on the matter might be very difficult to hear. Here are a few facts of what modern neo-Nazis believe, and they're talking about right now. As we acknowledge and face these points of view without running from them, we can actually start to defuse the tension together as a society and prevent instances of like what happened in Christchurch from happening again. I would say the very first thing that they believe, which is their primary motivation, is preservation of our genetic and historic lineage. They passionately love their people. They believe that white people are, by their nature, trustworthy, intelligent, socially cohesive, responsible, caring, and by our very natures build the greatest countries, towns, and cities on earth. They see nations like the United States, England, Sweden, Switzerland, Australia, Denmark, Belgium, Germany, all the Western nations as the pinnacle of civilization. The architecture, the traditions, the language, the poetry, all things Western are testament to white people's greatness. This validates the notion that when looking at less developed nations, which are rife with poverty, crime, dirty streets, disease, war, civil unrest, that there is a separation between them and us. And what they build is far lower because they are far lower. Lower intelligence, and lower natural social expression. It is true that different people traditionally and presently do have and have built different nations with different structures, and some are harder to live in than others. But rather than leaning on the leftist points of view to say that it's somehow the fault of white people, and honestly, it's rather lazy and shocking how often they make this point despite the lack of evidence for it. Let's just reflect instead on this view itself. We have indeed built, with great efficiency, prosperous nations. Perhaps there is room to feel inspired and even proud of what our ancestors did manage. And while nations like USA did engage in slave labor, any financial or developmental advantage that this gave them was pretty much wiped out completely by the cost and destruction of the civil war that they went through. But then they went ahead and created some of the most powerful nation on earth with very high living standard. Nations like Australia did not have slaves, but we built a nation in less than 200 years, which is world class in its living standards. Now, acknowledging this isn't bad, unless you feel that it shouldn't be permissible for any culture to feel pride in its heritage or their ancestors. And if you believe this, then you can judge. Another footnote here. Remember, we are seeking to understand them, so try to suspend your arguments against it temporarily. Because the more we validate shadows, the less sting they have, the less momentum. The second thing that they believe is that the nations will be far better off right off the cuff if all nations are homogenized. So Africa is for Africans, East Asia is for East Asians, India is for Indians, and Western nations are for whites. Now, many of them are old enough to remember Australia when it was just pretty much whites and Aboriginals. Now, we have always had a racial minority in the country. You know, we had a very rich, we got like Samoans and we have Italians and we have all people from different walks of life here, but they're always much rarer, even in the 80s. We didn't see as many of these people. They remember that life was simpler, that social trust was higher. People didn't lock their doors as much back then, and many people never locked their doors. There's this feeling of safety and security and social cohesiveness. Well, cut ahead 30 years, and the world today feels like and looks like a chaotic mess. We're struggling with debt, homelessness, low trust, spikes of crime rates, and Orwellian style government. Now, this is justified in their minds as valid because statistically we can see elevated crime rates in minority groups in Australia. In some cases, when you break everything down into racial chunks, you'll find double the instances of crime coming from some of the demographics. And yes, this is a sign of a major problem within those cultures. The question is, why is this the case? For them, it is everything to do with the fact that they are another race and it is inbuilt into them and they can't help it because they are not white and thus they cannot be trusted. Now, within these neo-Nazi groups, they have found a common bond. It's human nature to come together. And without a doubt, in modern society, isolation is a huge issue. With this ever-increasing statistic of broken families, diminishing of social connection, rising competition, and we all feel this, it's clear to see that coming together over something or anything can be highly appealing. To have a place in society, to have a role which is clearly defined, it appeals to the part of us that craves certainty and belonging. And make no mistake, they have this amongst themselves in a tightly woven social collective, a brotherhood and a sisterhood, something that today is very hard to discover. And for this, they would find it very difficult to break away from the ideologies because of that sense of identity. Now, that was a lot, and there's a lot more to be said about what they think. Now, if you guys like this video, if you want to hear more about what they're thinking, I have a lot more to share about it. I want to go into why they rally under Hitler and his perspectives. But at the end of the day, for now, we can start to see their mentality. They're always validating themselves. They're always being validated by what they look at. They're always fighting against a threat. And they're locked into a mateship that other people wouldn't understand about them. All of this collective movement, it turns really ugly when societies deny aspects of themselves that only they get to express. It turns ugly when we suppress certain things in ourselves. And perhaps the best thing that we can do as a nation is to allow them to be seen and validated without the endorsement. By doing this, we actually take away their deep need as rebels to fight back or fight to be seen or explosively react and shoot up a mall. It's awful, these things, when they happen. But this is just what happens when we suppress. If more of them were met in the street by people who, instead of reacting to them, said, yes, we understand your perspective, but here is why you may be wrong about it. In a fair and reasonable discussion, something in them would change. And they might even start to question their own worldviews. Anyway, thank you for watching. As I said, this has been a hard subject, but if you like it, let me know. Leave a comment in the description, and we'll be back for a part two.